Okay, okay.
Here we go. Welcome back to Transform with Gregory Carson, where we explore the developments and the evolution of the financial markets ecosystem, its transformation, and the people behind it. I'm your host, Greg Carson, and today we have a very special guest joining us. I'm honored to welcome my longtime friend, Adam Back, a renowned computer scientist, cypherpunk cryptographer, and the CEO of Blockstream. Adam is a pioneering figure in the world of Bitcoin and everything related to this technology. He's best known for his invention of Hashcash, the proof of work system that's used in Bitcoin mining and where he's named in the Bitcoin white paper. And he's OG Bitcoiner, one of the original cypherpunks, active trader and allocator, fully dedicated to Bitcoin for over, since the beginning, actually. It's rare to be able to say that. Adam's made significant contributions to development growth of, digital currencies, decentralized systems, and his work continues to shape all this stuff around us. So welcome, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's good to see you again. I've been hoping to get you on for some time, so I'm honored. How about if you just give me a little bit of background history, a little bit of introduction of how you would introduce yourself and how you got started in, maybe let's go back to the origin story, the Batman origin story. How you get started in cryptography and the beginning of your computer science career.
Yeah, I was doing a PhD in distributed systems at Exeter University in the UK, and so I actually one of the few people who knew what the Byzantine generals problem was because I read it. It was a Leslie Lamport paper, and that guy was a very prolific computer scientist who implemented LaTeX, invented Byzantine generals sort of problem description.
Why don't you tell
And
for our guests? Why don't you tell us what is the Byzantine and generals problem?
yeah, so it's I mean, I guess it's sort of traditional but among computer scientists to find a kind of cute way to describe a problem and then with a story and then, get serious and propose a potential solution and invite other people to like see if they can improve their solution.
But the
And the
problem's
problem
about
was,
communication, right?
yeah, so the problem is like coordination in a computer network. So, if you're not a network programmer, it's probably a bit unintuitive why this is a problem. But, you've got lots of computers on a network. The network's a bit unreliable, like sometimes the network cable gets unplugged or I can reach your machine, but you can't reach mine. All kinds of weird stuff is going on, right? In practice, like rarely, mostly it works, but you got to like plan for the worst case with network programming, and that's what people learn when they get into network programming. And so then Leslie Lamport's basically saying, look, if you want to coordinate these computers, they're all running some software, and you want them to do something. Um, it's difficult. So then he set about like describing it as a story about some generals in a hypothetical war in the Byzantine Empire, and some of them are like double agents, so they're lying, like their data is getting corrupted, and yet you can't you've all got to charge at once or you're going to lose. So you've got to coordinate, right? So it's like the coordination story in an unreliable network where somebody could be deleting some of your messages, some of the people you can't quite trust. Because I mean, in a distributed system, oh, the other fun thing is you can't rely on the clocks, right? Because like, what's the time? Well, like what? I mean, there's no kind of universal time, and people's clocks will be slightly wrong, and the messages take a variable amount of time to arrive. So the network is kind of not synchronous, which is another complexity. So he described this, and there are sort of interestingly there are proposals to do something about this, but it involves identity. So all the generals have a public key and a private key. They have one each. So somebody has got like certificate authority giving them certificates, and then they go right. So then the problem in the real world is, well, you can't rely on a certificate authority. It's a central party, right? So then it doesn't actually work in practice, or you get Sybil attacked, which is that one person pretends to be 100 generals and wrecks the whole thing. So Bitcoin, like Satoshi, one of the things he came up with was a solution to this, which is there's no central party handing out identities. You just get kind of one vote per hash. Like if you've got more compute power, you get more votes, and that's it. And then you've got anonymous participation, way to sort of arrive at a consensus result, which is the kind of new result in distributed coordination protocols, actually, amongst other things in Bitcoin, right? So it's kind of interesting from a distributed systems perspective.
Definitely. So that's super interesting. So what is a cypherpunk? We've heard this term a lot, and like a lot of our viewers are like investors or Bitcoiners or CEOs, but not everybody's going to know what is a cypherpunk and how what is that club you're in?
Yeah, so I think originally it was a kind of in-person meetup, but it became a mailing list, and the in-person meetup was in the Bay Area. And so I think there was some kind of people interested in privacy on the internet and realizing that, we have privacy in the physical world, but with the, at that time, like this is like mid-90s, early 90s, widespread adoption of the internet, that the ISPs were logging everything. They had your billing information. They knew who you were, where you lived. Yep. And you actually would accidentally lose your privacy. And the way law enforcement were going about it, that would just get worse and worse because, they would want to make their lives easier because that's their job, right? And so they'd ask ISPs for information and they just hand it over. I mean, the odd one would ask for like some rationale, but typically they just hand it over. So the cypherpunks were like, well, this is not good. According to societal norms and actually regulations and rights in human rights. I mean the kind of rules of the law of the land. Like in the UK or in Europe or in the US, you have various rights of freedom of association, privacy of your own affairs, expressed in different ways in different charters, and these were basically being ignored. So cypherpunks were like, well, let's fix it. Let's fix it with cryptography and software and networks. So if you have a right to privacy or freedom of association, let's just encrypt all our messages and, communicate with encrypted email, encrypted messages, or, use remailers so that the outside observer can't see who's emailing who. But, when you receive the message, you decrypt it and say, oh, like Greg sent me a message about the podcast, right? So, that kind of thing. So their attitude was, well, there's two ways to go about it. One is to go and complain and lobby to regulators and law enforcement and, mount some kind of, public interest court case or lobby politicians to say, you guys are like not following the regulations,
right?
Or just fix it with technology. And the cypherpunks are like, nothing changes without technology and people adopting technology. Don't ask for permission, just solve the problem. If lots of people use your solution, it becomes the new societal norm. And, typically after a few test cases, they'll give it up and that will be the new norm. So that's the attitude, is that's the cypherpunk mindset, right? Which is why they say cypherpunks write code. Mm-hmm. And Hal Finney was kind of the prototypical coder because he was always like, reading some paper or coding something and writing a little report about how it works and stuff like that.
Was he a friend of yours? Did you know how?
I never met him in person, but yeah, we interacted online, in email, on a mailing list, quite a bit over the years. Yeah.
Did you guys collaborate on anything, or?
Well, like indirectly. I mean, a lot of these sort of collaboration discussions were like on the mailing list, so we didn't like specifically collaborate.
This is like before Bitcoin, right?
Yeah. This is like early 90s onwards. So, yeah.
Wow. And
yeah, I mean, he actually implemented something that, because of Hashcash, so there's a sort of trajectory there where Hashcash was original. So Hal Finney was the guy that implemented the first encrypted remailer. So he was, I think, the first or one of the first employees at PGP, which was originally just an open source project. So I think he was actually an open source contributor on the PGP product before it became a company.
Okay.
with Phil Zimmerman. And then, the cypherpunks were, doing things with remailers to get privacy, and there was no encryption in it. So how added PGP encryption to remailers to make it
Right.
stronger and like
Private.
more realistic, right? And so, and then, with so that's where Hashcash came in, because people were spamming through the remailers, and I was one of the people running the remailer.
Okay.
And so, you can't, like, typically the way people would stop spam is they would block the IP address of the spammer's server, or their email address or domain.
Right.
But with a remailer, you can't do that because you don't know who it is, right? By design. And so it caused me to think about it in a different way. It's like, well, what's really the problem? Is it's free? Well, maybe we could charge. Well, okay, it's hard to get, this is before PayPal. It's hard to get credit card merchant processing. Secondly, it's not private, so that would break things if you like remailers.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I hit on the idea, well, maybe we can do something simpler. We can create a cost, even if it's not a transferable value.
Right.
So later on, there were some centralized but private electronic cash systems like David Chaum's DigiCash.
Okay.
And so around this time, DigiCash the company had kind of run out of money in Steam, and didn't get relationships with banks that they wanted, and the company went under. And so the way the cypherpunks, and we were all like very excited about DigiCash because it was kind of electronic cash for the internet with privacy, but it was like a stable coin, right? There was no mining and floating value. It was just, you'd wire in some fiat to a Dutch bank, and you'd get, some coins, and you could exchange them and then deposit them later with, very good privacy. But it was
Sounds
centralized, right?
archaic now.
Yeah, well, yeah, it does, yeah. And so basically, when DigiCash went bankrupt, people took it as an object lesson, and so then there was a whole kind of exploration of, well, we really want electronic cash. That one failed. Why did it fail? One of the reasons people took away as well. Firstly, they were looking for permission because they were asking the banks for a relationship to make it work.
Yep.
And secondly, it was centralized. So then, Nick Szabo was writing about, maybe you can do it in a decentralized network. He was writing about Byzantine General's problem, and Wei Dai was talking about things, and that was where so this is in 1998, and Hashcash was published in 97. And so people like pretty immediately were thinking that Hashcash was somehow like digital gold, and then trying to figure out how to make it work, right?
Right.
And so, B Gold and Wei Dai's proposal, and sorry, B Money, Wei Dai's proposal, and BitGold, Nick Szabo's proposal, were using Hashcash. And then that was 98. And then by 2004, Hal Finney again pops up, and he's implemented reusable proof of work, which is a centralized electronic cash system using trustworthy computing devices. So devices that can run code that you can trust hasn't been tampered with by the operator, and it makes a signature from the manufacturer that this is the code it's running and it hasn't been changed, that kind of thing. And it was a bit centralized, so he kind of simplified the problem so he could do it more easily. But he had Chaum's eCash protocol, and the way you got coins was you send it Hashcash work, and so he called that reusable proof of work. So it's the first kind of implemented example of this 1998, 1997 idea. So yeah, Hal pops up in a few places, usually implementing something or describing something he's read.
So the word proof of work came out of your Hashcash public.
Yeah, I think it was actually coined by somebody else. There were like a number of papers that came after, and one that came before that we didn't know about at the time, and they all had different names for it. And so I think the proof of work was in a later paper, but it stuck because it was a better name.
Right. Very, very interesting. And all those guys are still in the space, and it's when did Hashcash actually end up in Bitcoin? Like how did that occur, and how did you interact with Satoshi at the time?
Yeah, so I think how it ended up in Bitcoin is Satoshi was evidently somebody who just builds things and then announces them, right? So there was no kind of prior discussion or I'm building this, I'm partway through kind of, open source development, but it was kind of more like he implemented it in complete secrecy as far as anybody knows. and then, released the paper, and then that was in, I think, late 2008.
Yep.
And then he released the source code in January 2009. But there was no like prior design discussion or I'm working on this, what do you think kind of discussion. So the first I heard about it was he sent me an email in August 2008. And those emails are now public because I handed them over to the COPA trial. So they're online now.
And what did the
And
email? It just said, I'm going to use your hash cache. What do you think?
yeah, I mean, you can have a look at them. They're not very detailed. So, I mean, they're not very extensive, right? So he's just like, oh, I'm using Hashcash. Here's a link to my paper. You might find it interesting. How do I correctly cite Hashcash? And then there's, backwards and forwards exchange where I send him B-Money, which he doesn't seem to know about, Wei Dai's B-Money paper, and a couple of other kind of electronic cash related things that are similar in some way to Bitcoin. But it said, Satoshi said somewhere in the forums, like when I got more actively involved in 2013, I went and read all of Satoshi's like backlog of Bitcoin Talk forum posts, and somewhere in there, he says that he'd actually implemented Bitcoin before he wrote the paper. So it's like more hands-on empirical, right? So he says something like, well, he had to implement it to verify that it would work the way he thought it might work, right? And then after he'd written it, he writes a paper describing what it does, and then he emails me. So it seems like I was the first person to get an email, and then, I told him about B-Money, so he emails Wei Dai, who also published the emails. And then a bit later, he, this guy called Marty Malmy, who was a student at the time.
Marty Malmy?
Marty Malmy, yeah, it's a Finnish, I think, guy. He released a ton of emails exchanged with Satoshi in the same COPA trial, like hundreds and hundreds of them. So he actually got active in, helping build in the forum, discussing how to get people to use Bitcoin, all kinds of brainstorming. It's very interesting. It's kind of like a startup experience of what happened to Bitcoin before it got people's attention.
And that was new.
And
latest COPA trial.
Yeah. This is like, I haven't read it all because there's so much of it, but other people have gone through it, and it's like pretty interesting. Because we experienced Bitcoin as like, after it caught hold a bit and a few early people, adopted it, and then the Bitcoin pizza payment and Mt. Gox, and then more people got to hear about it. And so even my experience is like that, right? Because I wasn't active until like 2013. I knew about it in 2008, 2009, but I didn't do anything, right? But there were things going on in the kind of, seed startup stage of Bitcoin. And if you want to read about it, look for Marty Malmy, and people have looked through those big trove of email and what was going on. And they were basically doing startup things, It's quite funny.
Getting prepared. And that's so.
Yeah,
so
like writing FAQs and stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. And then Marty was the one that was basically in the trenches with Satoshi behind the scenes the whole time.
Yeah, I think at some point, he checked out and went off to do something else, Marty. But, for a long time, he was, collaborating, doing a lot of grunt work, writing FAQs, engaging in forums, brainstorming about branding, logos, all kinds of stuff, Yeah.
Super interesting. So he's actually core to the original story.
Yeah, he was a developer as well. So I think you can look in this animated Bitcoin development history, you'll see Sirius, which is Marty Malmy, and he's making code contributions as well.
Wow, that's fantastic. And so you were the first to email with Satoshi, and there's obviously a lot of videos on the internet saying that you might be Satoshi. You sure you didn't make those emails to yourself to set things up?
No. I mean, I think one of the the very technical people, like the core developers, they believe me when I'm saying not Satoshi. And I figured out, I mean, of course, I know I'm not, so I'm convinced, right? But to convince a third party is difficult sometimes, right? Because they're they want to know.
He would definitely say, I'm not Satoshi.
Yeah. I mean, there's well, Satoshi would say that. I was like, great. But, I think the one thing that is, you could find in logs is when people get down a rabbit hole, they ask a bunch of dumb questions, right? They assume that an address is like an account number and it's got a balance, and it's not. It's organized as coins. And so, I'm on the so in 2013, I get involved and I want to know how it works. I mean, my style of learning things is to go digest the reference manual,
Right.
right? And there's no reference manual, so I read what's available, and it's kind of light, and I still have questions. And I figure, well, there's got to be people who are like brainstorming about this and doing development
Yeah.
and thinking about the next step things. Where are they hanging out? So I found out they're on Bitcoin Wizards IRC, so I jump in there and start asking them a ton of questions. And like the initial questions are kind of dumb, right? You know, like, well, wait a minute, I thought the address was an account number and it's a balance, and when you send a payment, it subtracts from the balance. Like, no, it's like you're not supposed to reuse addresses, but if you do, they're still separate coins. When you
Mm.
spend a coin, it's all spent. There's no change left over, and you start asking some more questions. You know, and over some weeks, you get a better picture of how it works, and you stop asking silly questions and hopefully come up with something interesting, right? So,
So you have the
you know, I
silly
think
question
that
defense.
so I think that pretty much convinced anybody present in that conversation, like, well, Satoshi would know all this stuff, right? Uh, yeah.
Yeah, well, okay, so that's fair. So you have the silly question defense for protecting your Satoshi identity, which we can't say for sure one way or the other. Who do you think is Satoshi if it's not you?
Yeah, I don't
Who's
know.
the
I mean,
top three? I mean, who are the top three potentials?
it seems to me that all of the people that were sort of plausible candidates, you know, like Hal Finney and
Yeah.
things, they've all been like fairly well debunked as not the guy. Like Jameson Lopp found, like Hal Finney was a marathon runner, and Jameson Lopp found, some photographs and a marathon log of Hal Finney running a marathon while Satoshi's busy sending somebody coins at the same time. Like he went
Uh-huh.
through and looked at it. So it's like, well, unless he can run and like send Bitcoin transactions at the same time, it's not how, right?
Yeah.
So, and there are like anecdotal things for the other people too. So it doesn't seem like it's anybody we know, but anybody that anybody knows or anybody that's spoken. So and it and like think about it, unlike Ross Ulbricht, who started the Silk Road, and then people trawled through his history and they found him posting under his own name about like evidently the Silk Road before it existed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Satoshi didn't seem to make any kind of operational security mistakes, so he had to have been fully intending to be private
From
right
day
from
one.
day minus when he started coding or something. So so many people have been looking for breadcrumbs that I think we're never going to know, basically.
Wow.
Um, and maybe that's a good thing too, right? Because you can look at different altcoins and their colorful founders,
Yeah.
and it's generally not a good look, right? And it also doesn't. It's also not good because while we are immersed in this and we understand that it's distributed and an individual developer can't do anything because if he does something that people don't like, they won't run it, or that multiple people are compiling the code. It's very counterintuitive to people who aren't in the industry, and so it leads to a lot of confusion in the media. Even things like the Bitcoin.com domain name, right?
Yeah.
That there were people who would assume that the CEO of Bitcoin.com is the CEO of Bitcoin or something, right, in the media.
Yeah.
So it's just as well that we don't have that. There
Yeah.
isn't a Mr. Bitcoin.
There. Yeah. Not that we know of, and what about all the rumors that it might be someone from intelligence agencies like NSA or CIA or something like that?
I don't know. I
Or maybe
mean,
someone from there, maybe not in, as part of them, but maybe.
yeah, I don't. I wouldn't have thought so, but I mean, of course, you can't. It's all
No one knows.
speculation at that point, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think generally people that have worked for those agencies, at least officially,
Hmm.
have to get, even after they've left that industry, working in a private sector, they have to get pre-approval from the intelligence to publish anything to make sure they're not giving anything away that they
Hmm.
learn under.
Well, he
So,
did it anonymous, so he could be from there, and he knows
yeah,
how to. He
you'd have
obviously
to be
knows the
pretty careful.
system and how to get around. He's been. I
Yeah.
mean, he's been. Unmistakably careful.
Yes,
Without
that's
even a
true.
single. Without even a single. You know,
Yeah. I mean,
broken tongue.
Right, and it's interesting that he evidently intended to do this and did it very carefully, but there are some things on the cypherpunks that were like that. There was a previous electronic cash system, which was kind of a toy called Magic Money,
Hmm.
and that was by a pseudonym, which is product cipher, spelled with some, numbers and letters together,
And
like the O was a zero or
and no
something.
one ever knew who that was.
No, and it was an electronic cash system, and there were a few others that had published software anonymously. And I think there's another reason why somebody, assuming Satoshi was around and saw what happened in the previous systems or read
Yeah.
about them, there were people who had bad experiences from being identified, right? So there was the eGold system, which was, basically a website and a gold storage vault, and I had an eGold
Yeah.
account, and you could, buy a little bit of eGold, you get charged some basis points per year storage fee, and you could transfer it to other account holders. And there wasn't really like there was some kind of KYC, like they wanted a name and address, but they weren't checking it.
Hmm.
And so they got into trouble because, the authorities claimed they were intentionally not doing proper KYC or something like that. And so the founder got into, I think some of the founders were living in Florida, and
Yeah.
they got into trouble, like legal trouble. It was like, painful for them. And
Yeah.
so, and Phil Zimmerman also famously, got investigated by, is it the US Department of Justice probably? I mean, for like violating export laws that were in extent at the time for exporting cryptography software.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and if you were seeing that happen and realizing that Vera electronic cash was possibly a hotter potato than um, you know communicating privately,
Yep.
and looking at what happened to the eGold founders in terms
Yep.
of the legal trouble they ran into, then probably being anonymous would occur to a number of people that,
Yeah.
well, maybe I better do that without putting my name on it. So, that's a supposition. Like, we don't really know what Satoshi read and what he didn't. Like, for example, he never actually posted on the Cypherpunks list. He posted
Oh,
on
he
the
didn't.
cryptography list.
Okay.
And he didn't seem to know about BitGold. I'm sorry, he didn't seem to know about B Money. And B Money was discussed on the Cypherpunks list.
Mm.
So we don't know if he was even on the Cypherpunks list. But, I mean,
But
he knew about Hashcash. He probably knew about some other systems. I mean, he was working on this thing. Surely he'd be doing like internet searches and reading about
yeah.
technology he could use, right?
And you were at the, did you go to the Copa trial? The trial with
Yeah, I went for one day, which is I was testifying basically.
oh,
Yeah.
what did they ask you?
Um, well, the transcripts, people were sort of taking notes. I guess you're not allowed to record it, but
Right.
you can tweet it, and so people were reporting on it.
Hmm.
Yeah, so basically they asked me a bunch of stuff because I'd written some witness statements, you know, saying what happened
Yeah.
to my perspective, that I mean basically they were trying to get at, I was being examined by Craig's counsel, right? So they were trying to sow doubt on what I'd
Hmm.
said, and they seem to have some confusion actually. They seem to think that uh, Bitcoin proof of work is strictly leading zeros. And it's actually not quite. It's actually like, I mean, it has a lot of zeros, but it's because it's a fraction, right? So it's actually
Right.
like a floating point number. So the reality is it's sort of checking if the proof of work viewed as a massive floating point number is less than this other massive floating point number. And
Yeah.
so, they were cross-examining me, thinking they were tripping me up, and I was like, no, that's not how it works, right? And so I think probably Craig misunderstood it and gave them instructions that were
Yeah.
confused to try and like push me to so I don't know what I'm talking about, or that Bitcoin doesn't use Hashcash. I'm like, well, it changed Hashcash a bit, but it also doesn't work the way you're saying.
Right.
And so after that, the developers had a set of attorneys and barristers, and the COPA organization had a different set of barristers. So developers barristers then asked me questions too, which they only do if they want to like elaborate something, I guess, right? And so
Yeah.
they pulled up the code and said like, well, what does this do? So it so happened that I'd read that code about 10 years ago to understand exactly how Bitcoin used Hashcash because I was curious. And I even
Right.
wrote like a web page describing, the quirky things it does kind of thing.
Right.
Is I knew exactly what it did. And I told them, because it's clearly not what the Craig's barristers were trying to say it was, right? So that was a kind of fun moment, like, at
Yeah.
least for a technology geek, right?
Yeah. It's like
You
a
know,
pivotal technology court moment.
yeah, right.
Yeah. Interesting. It's interesting. And so, and the court case is over. There's more stuff to come, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't watch it. I mean, you could have, if you plan ahead, you can ask for access to the video stream, but I didn't do that with this last stage. But yeah, they were back in court like what, a week ago or something,
Yeah.
or earlier this.
Aren't you part of COPA with the block from through your CEO-ship of Blockstream?
Yeah, we're a member of COPA, but we did not know that COPA as an organization was
About to start.
going to start this court case.
Hmm.
So I think maybe Craig's lawyers thought we were, but that's not how it worked. Like we found out about it in the news the same as the next guy, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there must have been, a subset of COPA members that resolved to do this with some funding. I mean, we're not funding COPA, right? I mean, COPA's probably funded by, I don't know, Block and Jack Dorsey. I don't know
Yeah.
actually, right? I mean, the reason we got involved with COPA is the open source patent license. So
Yeah.
the,
Yeah. You wanted to put some open source stuff in there from Blockstream.
yeah. So I mean, we'd started one actually back in 2014. We were concerned that people would try to, like, banks and patent trolls would try to patent a bunch of core Bitcoin technology. So we developed a few things that we thought were in the public interest to defend, and so we
Right.
put them into it, and we made our own like Bitcoin defensive patent license and
Mm-hmm.
tried to encourage other companies to get in. And like we got a few participants, but we didn't really have the reach and the resources to bring like big companies in.
Yep.
And so when Block dove into it and started COPA, they were able to bring some bigger companies in. So we said, "Oh, great! Like you can take over what we've done," and we put
Yeah. Just
our
take.
patents into
Yeah.
that, right? Yeah. So
So
that
yeah.
was actually our intro to COPA and our focus with COPA. So we didn't really know about the COPA kind of fight back against Craig Wright. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. And I want to get into a couple other things, but first, like, what is what is Bitcoin Core, and what are the how does that work, and what are the politics around it, and who is Bitcoin Core, and who's developing and maintaining the code now and in the past? I mean, it's an important
Um.
financial
Yeah.
piece, and I think finance people don't realize that there is some code that evolves, and
Right.
what is the dynamic of that?
Yeah. So I think Bitcoin Core is kind of the reference client, if you like, and Bitcoin has one, like Bitcoin as a piece of network or peer-to-peer technology,
Yeah.
has one new feature, which is this kind of consensus compatibility, which is you need all of the nodes on the network, even if they're different versions of the same software or software written by different people, to
Mm-hmm.
behave exactly the same as far as consensus related code comes.
Yeah.
And so consensus related code is anything that would, you know, be considered invalid in the network.
Yeah.
So, if somebody sends a transaction that's, got the wrong format or the signature is invalid or something, then, and if different nodes had a different view of what the valid rules are, then they'd fork off and you'd get like different fragments of the network and that'd be very bad. So you want to be really careful to not have like external network forks. And that's happened a couple of times. I was a BIP 66. There was many years ago now. Something went wrong where I think, um,
What was that?
I
What
forget
did?
which one. I'm not sure if it's that one, but one of them was it turned out a piece of code would behave differently on 32-bit CPUs and 64-bit CPUs in some esoteric way. So they had to like, that created a fork, and then they had to fix it rapidly.
Yeah.
Just because if different nodes believe they're on the right track and then they just diverge off into the distance, you've got to resolve that pretty quickly or it's going to get ugly, right? And the clients in the meantime are confused. Some will be following one or the other or what have you. So that aspect means that in practice, most of the network is using Bitcoin Core as a reference client because it turns out to be a lot harder than people would assume to make even one client compatible with different versions of its, like historic versions of itself, and avoid forks. But once you implement from scratch another implementation in another language, it seems empirically to be almost impossible to get it exactly the same. There's not really a specification. So the specification is basically whatever that code does. And it's a lot of code with a lot of, edge cases and bit level things that could change your behavior. So people have implemented different node software, but when they've, put that in the network, different people have found ways to get them to fork off, right? So people have learned through bad experience that, you want to rely on Bitcoin Core for your what is valid testing, right? You can run other library software or other nodes if you want, but you want to shield it from a network by a Bitcoin Core node. And so then the question is, well, how does a Bitcoin Core software evolve? So very carefully is one answer, right? 90% testing, 10% coding.
Yeah.
And then and I think there's two types of
people, right? That's a group of people.
Yeah, I mean it's a group of developers, anybody can get involved, and of course it's a little frustrating because you'll write some code and then you need other people to review it. And so this is somewhat common with other open source projects like Linux or something, which is you'll write some code and the code base is moving, right? So if your code doesn't get in, then you have to adapt it for the changes that happen. So you can sit there, adapting your code as a change happens for a year before anything happens, and some people get sick of it and leave. So it's a kind of exercise in patience, but you're trying to improve something, right? You're trying to optimize something or simplify something. So a lot of the changes are kind of, bug fixing, optimization, keeping up to date with, new compilers and things like that. And then some of it is, implementing new consensus rules, like a new opcode. And those are fairly infrequent at this point, right? A few years or more between. And that is even more critical. So if you touch the consensus code, that's the most dangerous bit of code to touch, because if you get it wrong and version 24 behaves different than version 23 in one rare circumstance, now you've accidentally created a fork risk, right? So people are extremely careful about that. And also
opcodes are part of the consensus mechanism.
Yeah, well, I mean, you all of the opcodes, at least since the very early days, Satoshi apparently used to do kind of very roughshod things like just hard fork something because there weren't many people on the network, and you could just push an update, and people would upgrade it quickly enough that there wouldn't be too many versions on the network. But now there is so much software inertia that you can't really rely on anybody updating anything, right? So you need very careful backwards compatibility. And and then the other thing with opcodes is, there's this concept of ecosystem consensus. One, people are talking about covenants now, right? So some people like covenants, some people don't. And then the next question is, well, and there are many opcode proposals for covenants.
How many?
Opcat, probably half a dozen at least, opcats, CSFS, TLV, TXHash, and there's more of them basically, right? And CTV, they all achieve roughly the same thing with different trade-offs.
How do you describe what they achieve?
So I mean, the concept of a covenant itself is quite interesting. So it's generally improving the power of the scripting language so you can implement more sophisticated things, which are currently either not really possible to implement, or you could only implement them by proxy by trusting a central party to co-sign in some circumstance or something. So it definitely improves what you can do, and the where that word comes from, the covenant, is kind of if you buy a house, there'll be some covenants on it that says, well, you've got to maintain this fence, and the neighbor's going to maintain that fence, and you're not allowed to remove them after they're there, right? If you sell the property, the covenants have to go with it. And so that's the concept with a covenant, that a Bitcoin transaction has a small contract that goes with it that says how it can be spent. And with a covenant, you can say something about how it can be spent in future, right? So you can say, well, this transaction you have to keep this clause on the transaction when it's respent. And so it can like enforce something about the format of the spendability of the recipient's coin as well.
Yeah.
And it turns out that's enough to make interesting things like vaults. And a vault is where you need you can sort of devault something. So it's kind of like a time lock vault in a physical world, but implemented on a blockchain. And the idea there is you could give a notice period. I'm going to take this coin out of the vault, and then you could cancel it for like a week. And then after, if nobody cancels it for a week, okay, then you can spend it. And so that, that protects you from, all kinds of heist scenarios, right? If somebody gets in there and tries to default it and it's not legitimate, then you can give power to lots of people you don't have to trust very much to cancel it, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's really quite useful security thing if you try to, if you get into the business of custodying coins or thinking about how to custody them, that would actually be quite useful. And then because it's the general improvement in the flexibility, it enables other layer 2 things. So one covenant variant is APO, any previous out, and that one was focused on APO, O for Oscar. So it's any previous output. And so that is, it turns out you can also write covenants with that, but it was actually designed to enable an improved version of Lightning. So Lightning wants this to become more powerful. And when people look at the other opcodes, one of their tests is, well, can you implement that L2 Lightning with this opcode? And most of them you can, just use them in a different way. So that's another one of the opcodes
they want. So would that work with Opcat too? Would that be good for Lightning?
Probably. I mean, that's one of the tasks, I think. And there have been some kind of developer meetups. There's one last month or so where a number of people who are interested or propose these opcodes will meet up. I think this was in Austin, Texas, BTC++ event, and they had some time to compare and contrast, like describe what this opcode does. And one thing you can try to do is implement different features that people, try to implement L2 with it, try to implement a vault with it, and see if you can do that with all of them. And the other thing you can do is see if you can emulate one opcode with the other, right? So, if with a sequence of instructions, maybe you can, convert opcat and implement CTB with it, or maybe CTB could implement opcat. So you can sort of see, you could test equivalence.
Yeah.
Another thing that is, so I think ARC, which is Burek's proposal, another layer 2, he needs his covenants for that. And so actually with Liquid, which is Blockstream's kind of sidechain technology, we actually have covenants in it, right? We have CAT in it, we have CSFS, which is another checksig from Stack, which is another covenant enabling feature, and actually about 30 helper functions to make it more convenient to implement covenants that we added in the second version some years later.
Yep.
And so for example, Burek with ARC layer 2, he implemented it on Liquid because he has the opcodes. And that was a way for him to validate for real, does it work? Because he's got his theory that it works. Well, let's see if it works in practice. And so he's able to do that on Liquid. And so, I think that's an interesting way to validate something. Do it on a real network with real money, real, layer 2 Bitcoin, like pegged Bitcoin. And then it works for sure, right? Because you can like program it and use it, build wallets for it. And so that's what he did. And then that is a kind of validation so that, when this
was the original was the first sidechain essentially, right?
I believe so. Yeah. Right.
I remember when you launched that back in the day. I was involved.
Yeah.
But and is it still going? So what about Liquid? What if one of these covenants went through? Wouldn't you be able to make Liquid, improve Liquid dramatically, or get rid of the trusted elements of Liquid?
I mean, that is one of the I mean, it's not like super clear how, but because there's some things are still a bit of a research question,
Yep.
but it's definitely the case that the candidate ideas for how to improve the trustlessness
Hmm.
of sidechains
Yep.
um, involves covenants, right? So
Right.
having covenants gives you that bit much more flexibility, and you can see it also um, with Arc, right? That a little bit more extensibility lets him build Arc. Without that, he can't really implement Arc properly. And
Got it.
so, in the debate about ossification, i.e., the idea that it's a risk to change Bitcoin, um, and actually, I think the original ossification argument came from Satoshi, which
Really?
is
What?
there's a Bitcoin, I think it's a Bitcoin Talk forum post by Satoshi like before he left I think he left in what 2011 or something, so somewhere in there. um, he says he rushed the development of Bitcoin script before he released the code because to his mind, once the code was released, it had to be frozen for all time, and so he wanted the
It'd be frozen
script to
for all
build.
time.
Yeah, he wanted the script, therefore, so that it would be so you could program things with it, so you wouldn't need to change it. So that was his kind of hope, right? But
But he
then,
didn't do it.
while
He
he
kind of took him
implements
out. He
the
took him out,
script,
right?
yeah, but the problem was that some of the opcodes ended up having like denial of service or security bugs, and so in a kind of quick fix, he disabled a handful of them. Otherwise,
Hmm.
Bitcoin actually had opcat, for example, at the beginning, and it would have had covenants from like version 0, right? Um, so
So
it's a
he
kind of
took out
happenstance.
Opcat from the original code.
Yeah, well, he just disabled it because it had a denial of service risk that you could like
Does it still
blow
have
the
that, or has
script
that
up.
been fixed?
Oh, they just disabled it. But
No, I
when
mean,
people are
like if
talking
he were
about,
to be
oh yeah,
implemented.
yeah, yeah, I mean, the opcat we have in Liquid has a fix, and people have proposed fixes for, because now they're talking about, well, maybe opcat could be re-enabled on Bitcoin as a covenant or as a first stage covenant. Do some
How
more
would you block
sophisticated layer.
the how would you block the denial of service risk of Opcat if they put it in?
I think they just put some limits on it, so you can't like create a recursive explosion, basically.
Right.
So they just apply like script limits and like worst case behavior limits, and then it becomes not dangerous. So you've got the flexibility, but you can't like cause a kind of memory or CPU explosion or something.
That's cool. That's cool. So these covenants. So basically, if I repeat it back to you, the covenants are proposals to change the Bitcoin core code, the Bitcoin code, so that you can actually have like smart contracts and vaults and various conditional, programmable elements to Bitcoin. And I think the thing that people maybe don't realize is that it originally did have this, but Satoshi felt it
Right.
wasn't quite ready when he wanted to launch it, and he basically just disabled it and launched it um, with the idea
Oh,
that it needed to be revisited.
yeah, no, actually, he launched it with the bugs in it, and then somebody found the problem sometime later, and then he disabled them in a hurry. So
Ah,
that's what that was the
so
sequence.
it actually was Opcat is in Bitcoin. It just got
It was,
disabled
yeah,
for like a
right.
year, or like
And
6 months.
I'm not sure the timeline, but yeah, it was live, and then somebody realized, oh no, that's like a horrible denial of service risk. Look at
Mm.
what you can do, and so then he, probably there's a forum post or something somewhere where somebody reporting the bug, and then like a rushed patch from Satoshi or something. I don't know. You can probably find it on the forums.
So the cat's coming home. It's trying to come home, but there's people have
Yeah.
other proposals.
Well, right. I mean, that's the question, So I mean, there are rationales for different ones, right? Like, the one of the rationales for cat, I mean, there's a couple of them, but one is it's extremely simple because it just, takes two
Right.
strings off the stack and puts them back on, and then with some kind of sanity check stuff so it doesn't blow up, right? And that's it. And so there aren't really any design questions to argue about, because like the challenge with a lot of things is like, well, we want to do this like CTP or we want to do TX hash, and then there's like a dozen different ways you could improve it or change it, and then people get stuck like bike
Yep.
shedding, arguing about which one would be better. So Opcat has no bike shed ability because it just does one thing and it's extremely simple,
Yep.
and yet it turns, in like Bitcoin opcodes are kind of like assembly instructions on a CPU, right? So in practice, you combine them with other ones. And so
Yep.
if you combine it, it's actually quite powerful. Now, I mean, the detractors would say, well, it's going to be a pretty ugly script to get it to do anything useful because you have to combine it with like, dozens and dozens of opcodes to get it to do anything at all, right? And that might be true, but the other argument in favor of opcat is kind of more philosophical, which is like, well, Bitcoin had it before.
Yeah.
So, like, because an argument is like, well, do we want covenants? Do we want this? Do we want that? Right? Like, it would enable this, and maybe we don't want this. People thinking about, user level and security and
Hmm.
like protecting their Bitcoin stash from undesired like risk being imported into Bitcoin from this sort of thing. So, for that mindset, I mean, my argument for that mindset is, well, okay, but like, I think we need to enable more things to happen on layer two. And so to get to ossification, we first have to like put back and fix up the opcodes. So Satoshi's original idea of having, everything be implementable in script so you don't have, so you can freeze it.
Yep.
So I think we've got to like, fix the script up a bit before we can freeze it. And that will enable more things on L2. And then people will be less, needing to try to push for change
Like
on
fake
L1.
fake stuff, or like make bridges and you know.
Yeah, right.
So
So
what
improve
would
the
you say?
security.
What would you say are the top three covenant, or the top three potential covenants that you think should go through?
I don't know actually. I mean, I just listened to other people's podcasts. So Andrew Polstra did one on Opcat, and Rusty Russell had another proposal, which is the Great Script Restoration Project, which is basically to re-enable all the stuff Satoshi disabled, which wasn't just Opcat; it was a few others as well.
What are the other ones?
Uh, one of them is like integer arithmetic. So you can't even do like, you can't do math, like, add numbers up and stuff in Bitcoin because he disabled them. And that
Okay.
turns out to be more important, that turns out to be important for like, writing some kinds of scripts and things.
Yeah.
So
If you're gonna do
Rusty's kind
financial
of,
transactions, if you're gonna do financial
right.
markets, it would be super
Yeah.
basic.
So Rusty's like, I mean, you know, I think he went through and actually put some thought into how to cost them.
Yep.
So, like different Bitcoin script operators have different costs. So,
Right.
you'll have like verify a hash, verify a signature. That's pretty heavy, right? And then you have another one, which is, is this number zero or not? Well, it's incredibly cheap, right? And so to avoid denial of service, the argument is you want to know, benchmark roughly how expensive they are so that they can cost that much in terms of
Hmm.
fees or something. So he put together a proposal for how to do that. So I don't know, how much enthusiasm for that would be, but it's kind of a step beyond opcat, which is like, don't just re-enable opcat, but re-enable all the ones that got disabled at that time.
Hmm.
And I mean, other ones are more specific, like TX hash,
That was the one before you.
CTV. Those are sort
What was
of
the other one? BTV, you said?
CTV.
Oh, CTV. Yeah,
That
I remember.
um, that one's been talked about a lot. But I don't want to like, I don't really have opinions on it because I haven't like tried to understand them all. So the way I look at it is you want the people who have put the effort in and do understand them to go to more of those like in-person hackathons and reach technical consensus about which one they collectively think is best. And if they're convinced, then I'm happy personally, right? Like I'm enthusiastic for governance because I think the programmability is useful.
It's gonna be amazing. I mean, it would basically render all the shit coins kind of moot, right? I mean,
Yeah,
all these layer ones and altcoins and reused code
yeah.
and blockchain technologies. Those were all created essentially. Vitalik created Ethereum because there was no covenant capability, essentially, right? If you
Well, yeah, and to get rich, right? I mean,
yeah.
don't forget the incentives.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people that want to get rich in all these places, but I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
but that was the opportunity. There was a vacuum, and
yeah,
if you read any of the original stuff around Bitcoin, it's always mentioning the idea of a smart, of some sort of ability to do a smart contract or to do some sort of transaction,
yeah.
conditional transactions.
Well, I mean, my comment about the get rich is actually somewhat serious, which is that they got like whatever coin they make, they got to make a pitch for it, right?
Yep.
So, if Bitcoin had script, the pitch wouldn't be smart contracts; it'd be something else. Like Litecoin is the silver to Bitcoin's gold, or what? I mean, okay, then what's Feathercoin? Is Feathercoin the, I don't know, bronze to Litecoin silver? And every one of them has got some kind of little story, right? And so the way I think about it is like they got to have a meme or a story, and so it doesn't really matter. They want their meme or the story. So if Bitcoin had everything, they'd still be making meme coins, right? So.
Yeah,
Um,
for
but
sure.
I think it's useful because it will enable more robust layer twos. And another candidate for longer term Bitcoin ossification is simplicity, which is a sort of next generation Bitcoin script language that we've been
Okay.
working on at Blockstream for some years. And it predates Blockstream. I think it's like 2012 Bitcoin Wizards discussion with Russell O'Connor. Um, and when people have heard about MAST,
Mm-hmm.
actually that was, simplicity is a whole language around MAST, and it's lower level, so it's kind of more like machine code level, and effectively it means that it's sort of Bitcoin's last soft fork. If you had simplicity, you could implement all these opcodes directly without permission, without needing consensus
Mm-hmm.
within this next generation Bitcoin script. And
But
simplicity
you need
itself could be
opcodes
soft
in the
forked.
code, though, right? You couldn't do them
Yeah,
without them.
you would
You need
need
both.
what you need to do is soft fork in simplicity, and then after that you could implement opcat, ctb, all this kind of stuff natively, and any new ideas you come up with you can implement with it because it's much lower level. So
Mm.
it's kind of like in cpus you have like uh, operators, cpu instructions,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of cpus these days also have microcode, and only the manufacturer can really write microcode, but they can use it to like you know change something and distribute like a firmware microcode patch for your CPU. So it means that there's a kind of programmability at a lower level. So you can implement things, and it's specialized. So maybe only a few people will be writing this kind of simplicity microcode, but they're compilers from high level languages,
Yeah.
and it makes Bitcoin fully flexible on a scripting basis. And the other important thing is it has formal provability, like formal semantics and provability, so you can prove the behavior of your script. So current
Yep.
Bitcoin script, it just does what the interpreter says it does, and semantics are not super clear necessarily. I mean, they're defined by the code, but it's not written down in a mathematical way. And so simplicity, for example, we have a simplicity interpreter, and we have a proof that simplicity interpreter will correctly execute all possible simplicity contracts, which is kind of
Yep.
like, wow, like that's not true for Bitcoin script today or
Right.
any other script done or like any other like altcoin scripting language. So you've got like very mathematically logic defined semantics, which is good.
Mm-hmm. Is it
Um,
ready?
I mean, we've been working on it for a long time. We are aiming to have it in Liquid this year. But like there is a history of like technology transfer from Liquid to Bitcoin. Like it had SegWit first. It had one
Okay.
of the time lock features that came in Bitcoin some years ago. It had that first, and it had Schnorr signatures first, actually. So, but the timeline between that and getting to Bitcoin is some years, and you can never assume that just because you think something's a good idea, that
That
people are
other
going to
people
reach
would too.
consensus to put it in Bitcoin, right? So
Yeah.
we think it's cool. We think it's actually, because if you want to ossify Bitcoin, you have to be fairly confident that this is the last change you'll need.
Yep.
And I think simplicity may have that because it's lower level and so fully generic.
Okay.
Whereas the covenants and things are not, right? So you implement the covenant and then somebody will run into some other limitation. They say, oh, we really need,
Mm-hmm.
another opcode, right? And so it's
Yeah.
sort of never ending. Whereas simplicity is lower level that you can really confidently saying, oh, we got this, right? We can,
Yeah.
you know,
So you
do
really
anything
want
we
to
need
have
to
an
do.
opcode approved and the upgraded Bitcoin script, and then also the arithmetic. These are kind of like the three things that you think would be the next level for Bitcoin and open up all the
Yeah,
doors.
yeah.
So is Is Bitcoin quantum resistant? We see all these things coming about quantum and quantum resistance. Is that something that Bitcoin can
Um,
handle, or I mean, I think you and I spoke about it over a beer a while ago. But
we did,
is
yeah, right.
is quantum a risk? And if it's a risk, like how much of a risk is it? Because there's a lot of people that talk about that, and most of them are not happy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, I got into some arguments with some quantum enthusiasts on Twitter over the last few months, but basically, it's a kind of active research area. Maybe, I mean, it wouldn't be a popular thing to say, but I would say it's a little bit like um, fusion power, right? Which is, you know, we think it works. People have been working on it for a long time, but nobody's actually, you know,
Right.
got it to scale reliably yet to a point where it's
You're talking about
commercially
quantum, or you're
usable.
talking about the quantum resistance?
Well, right. Well, I'm talking about the reason you might want quantum resistance, which is the existence of powerful quantum supercomputers.
Yeah.
And so, the data is that for a lot of years, the quantum computers were improving like relatively slowly and linearly. Like,
Yeah.
they'd go from like 5 bits to 7 bits and stuff like
Yeah.
that, right? And so the claim is now, oh, we're in the hundreds and stuff, but
100
it
qubits. Yeah.
really depends on a lot of real world parameters. So I'm not really qualified to comment on, the realism of, because it's like an advanced physics and,
Yep.
sort of hardware construction thing. But the characteristics of them are they have to stay in this quantum octantal state, and that can be a bit unstable. So you can get them in that state and they'll start a computation and then they'll fall out of coherence before your computation's finished, and then
Hmm.
you failed, right?
You gotta do it
And
again.
then and then the other question is, like, how fast is it? Like, what's the clock rate? How many of these things can it do? Because but it's like very parallel, so maybe that can offset it a bit. And then the other question is, like, can they scale it? Can they make more bits? And then the other problem is they are actually, you know,
Well, let's
very, very
assume it
small
scales.
things.
Let's assume quantum scales. So then,
Yeah.
is Bitcoin a risk? Is Bitcoin? I mean, maybe it goes at risk and it gets attacked. I mean, can it be forked quickly, or is there a code waiting in the wings to prevent quantum from screwing it up? Or can you use the quantum computer as part of the hash, part of proof of work? Like, what is the
I mean,
solution?
there are, I think post quantum cryptography is luckily far better developed than quantum, hardware.
Okay.
So my computer scientists know generally how to, do signatures and encryption that
Right.
is robust against quantum computers.
Right.
And speaking of Leslie Lamport, the same guy invented a quantum proof signature scheme like decades ago, which is called the Lamport signature scheme. It's the same guy again
Hmm.
as the Byzantine generals problem. The problem with his signature scheme is it's big, like
Yeah.
it's like kilobytes, right? And so there are some like slightly more efficient ones that people have confidence in,
Yep. Yep.
but the to be a lot more efficient, it's a current research area. So you don't want to adopt bleeding edge research because maybe it will prove to be insecure. Like people were excited about lattices, lattice-based cryptography, and then there was some kind of ePrint paper which caused people to, you know, uh, for a short while think, oh no, like lattice cryptography is not quantum secure. But I'm not
Hmm.
sure if that result stood, like the people were arguing about it. But it's an example of why you don't necessarily want to rush and deploy something in Bitcoin
Right.
that has not withstood a bit of a test of time. So, I mean, I think the one of the arguments for Opcat actually is it would be enough to implement Lamport signatures using it, right? Because Lamport signatures are just based on hashes.
Yep.
So, then you could say, well, Bitcoin has Lamport signatures. If you care about it personally, use them, right? Or
Yep.
you want to do some like high value long term storage, use them, right? So that would be one solution, because otherwise there's sort of people agitating for post quantum things now, and I think it would be a useful exercise to test it out, right? To like make some candidate scheme that the cryptographers with specialization in this area feel confident with, to like
Yeah.
have it tested in the wings a bit, right? I think that's a reasonable step.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, Opcat would allow you to implement it without like a Op Lamport signature, right? So that could be done.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool. Cool. So I understand from when we were chatting the other day, that you are, I mean, everyone looks at you as this, you created Hashcash and you've been super involved in the core and obviously with Blockstream. And there's a couple things I want to chat about that later on. But the other side of your personality, which I don't know if everyone knows, is that you are quite an active and avid trader and allocator.
yeah.
So I'm
So
curious to tell me what excites you about trading and like what kind of trades and trading have you been doing over the last kind of 5, 6 years? I know we're in a couple groups and that's where we really get Adam chatting is when there's trade strategies and interesting like
right.
anomalies in the market that you can take advantage of and stuff like that. What is your trade philosophy and what kind of stuff do you trade?
So I mean, I was a day trader in the mid '90s,
Okay,
and uh,
stocks.
like yeah, wised up over time. You know, from the typical day trader trading anything that moves based on momentum to like, getting into a bit of a global downturn and
Hmm.
turning into a value investor who paid attention to what I'm buying. Like, well, do I want to buy this through different market cycles? Do I want to hold
Yes,
it?
exactly.
So I thought that was like coincidentally good. It's good to have trading experience because if you jump in the deep end and your first trading experience is trading Bitcoin, boy, is that thing volatile, right? Trading
Yeah, yeah,
volatile things is you know, you got to adapt your thinking to the volatility, and you know, there are lots of like trading uh, kind of rules of thumb that people have found out or learned independently. Like, you know, you shouldn't get into a trade that you're not prepared to hold. If it's you know if it's too big for you and you're going to panic sell it later, then it's a bad trade, right? Whereas
yeah,
maybe somebody else has got a better risk tolerance or a higher risk tolerance, and they would be cool as a cucumber holding that thing.
yeah,
But you know, you don't want to be, and you also don't want to be a forced seller. Like you're in trade that you really like, but you got too much leverage, so you can't hold it. That's bad too, right? So you got to be careful about leverage, particularly with Bitcoin volatility. And then, you know, so I generally have been doing, you know, just a bit of directional trading on Bitcoin, and you know, buying it when it goes down, that kind of thing. But also looking for Bitcoin basis trades. So, you know, if you're generally all in Bitcoin and mostly in Bitcoin, you don't have any dollars to trade with, right? And so some people will dabble with leverage, which is dangerous.
yep, yep.
Or the other thing you could potentially do is do a Bitcoin basis trade. So, you know, you could sell Bitcoin call options. They're out of the money, collect a bit of premium that way. Some people do that.
Hmm.
Um, I don't like directly do that, but um, what so what I do as well is borrow dollars against Bitcoin
Yep.
at low interest rates and lend them out short term on margin lending platforms at high interest rates. So you know if you can borrow at borrow dollars at 3% or 5%, lend them out for 15, 20, 25% depending on the market, you can make a bit of money, and it's margin managed on the platform. Of course, you've got to be careful where you do it. Like some of the DeFi platforms get hacked. I stay away from
Yep.
those. Some of the exchanges get hacked. So you want to know
Where do you do
something
it?
about, well, I do it on like Deribit, Bitsy, Bitfinex, BitMEX. Um, so basically places with, you know, futures, perpetual futures,
Hmm.
and Bitfinex has a margin lending market. And then I do my borrowing like on like, you know, brokerage kind of places where you can borrow at low kind of TradFi rates using ETFs or Bitcoin
Hmm.
ETFs, stuff like that, right? So,
Hmm.
and the point is, you know, because this is borrowed money, you need to not get term mismatch. So you need to give the money back. You know, let's say you got one Bitcoin, the price is 70,000. You borrow 50% of it. So now you got 35,000. You're lending out, and Bitcoin price pulls back to 50%. Now you need to send 10,000 back to the person you borrowed, to the institution you borrowed it from, and
Hmm.
do it quickly, right?
Yep.
So if you've lent that out fixed term for a month, you have a problem unless you've got some other liquidity. So what I tend to do is like things which I can, or at least an allocation of things which I can withdraw quickly from. So if you do the basis trade on futures, like perpetual
Yep.
futures or dated futures, you can
Hmm.
close that like pretty instantly.
Yep.
Um,
Especially on the centralized
and
exchanges like Deribit and whatnot. It's
yeah, yeah,
super extra liquid.
yeah, and your implied interest rate on that is market dependent.
Yep.
So if it's a bull market, it'll run like the Bitcoin denominated perpetual futures will run hot. You could get 25, 30, even 40% for periods.
Yeah.
Um, and they're different, right? The BitMEX one, the you are collecting a funding rate on the open position size. So if you allocate $10,000 there, and then you'll buy $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, you put it on as collateral, and then you'll short it. That's the basis trade, right? You buy the physical Bitcoin with your dollars.
Hmm.
In my case, that I borrowed, right? And
Yep.
so you'll buy physical Bitcoin with it. Sounds counterintuitive, but it's
Yeah.
actually not. It's not exposed to the Bitcoin price because you use it as collateral, and then you short $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, and you collect the funding rate, which comes from somebody who's trying to go long, like trying to be margin long, right, or
Right.
leverage long. And of course, in a bear market, that can go negative, so that'll be another reason to get out of the trade. Now you're getting charged, right?
Hmm.
So in
You're
in a
covering that
BitMEX
by selling
case,
the. You're covering that though, right? You're hedging it.
yeah, I mean you're fully hedged. So your dollar position is constant. If your short loses money, your collateral will have increased. If the short is making money, the collateral will have fallen. So it just has a stable dollar value. Um, But what I'm saying is that if you use the perpetuals in a bear market, the funding rate can turn negative, and so you get paid to be long, and as you're short, you get charged to be short, and then you'll want to stop that because it's costing you money, right? So the strategy you can only run when the market is positive, basically. Um, and the BitMEX one is on the basis of the size you opened it at, right? So if you put $10,000 in, you're just going to collect the funding rate on the $10,000,
Yep.
where the Deribit and the Bitsy are on the perpetual future size, like the short. So if you short one Bitcoin and the price is $35,000, you're going to get the funding rate on $35,000. But if the price doubles to $70,000, now your notional loss is bigger, and so you'll collect the funding rate on $70,000, even though you only have $35,000 of exposure. So, in a bull market, the Deribit and the Bitsy actually give you, more interesting return, right? Whereas
Yeah.
there's a downside to that, right? Which is, if the price falls, your size you're collecting your funding on is smaller.
Yeah.
So you could win on BitMEX, but I think when the price falls, it's generally uninteresting. So you're going to shut it down anyway because
Right.
the funding rate will go negative.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the choice for like those differences on the platforms about how it works. You can also do the dated futures, collect the premium.
What did
Um,
you I think you said before that you wanted that you did a big trade on the MSTR stock on Sailor stock. What was that?
yeah, so I've been trading MicroStrategy on and off for a few years and sort of getting, back testing it, getting a feel for how it behaves versus Bitcoin. And the observation is it tends to um, fall faster than Bitcoin. Like if Bitcoin goes down, 1%, maybe it'll go down a bit more. And if
Hmm.
Bitcoin goes up 1%, it'll go up more than 1%. So, and, in the bottom of a bear market, it will be a significant distance, so if you've got the nerve and you can buy MicroStrategy in the bottom of a bear market and hold on to it, you can potentially make a lot of money in uh, with a Bitcoin investment. So I am saying I'm pricing MicroStrategy in Bitcoin. And so, for example, I use 100 MicroStrategy shares as a basis because that makes it easier to compare with Bitcoin. So 100 MicroStrategy shares is worth about 2.3 Bitcoin at the moment. And right after the ETFs had launched earlier this year, 100 MicroStrategy shares was worth 1.1 Bitcoin. So it's literally half price in Bitcoin terms. So if you bought that and sold it back now, you could potentially double your money in Bitcoin. Now, there's some outliers there, right? Which is, I think it was mispriced right after the ETFs, because I think
MicroStrategy was mispriced.
Yeah, I think MicroStrategy was mispriced because, some people sold it to move their money into the ETFs. And
Yes.
so, there was money moving out and it depressed the price. And looking at the momentum on the price going down, probably some other people panic sold it. And so I thought it got to an unrealistic price. And I started tweeting, hey, look, MicroStrategy is mispriced.
Did
And
you
like
tweet
right after I said
before
that,
or after?
no, like when it happened, like, because I've been watching it since last year, right? So I'm like, wow, that's a crazy price, right? That's ridiculous. So, and then I was tweeting statistics like every day. Oh, it's gone up 5%, another 5%, another 5%. It just kept going up, right? So it got back to its kind of norm. And so it turned out I was right. But there were people that were worried that it was all over for MicroStrategy after their ETFs. They were thinking about it as an ETF proxy because we didn't have spot ETFs.
Yep.
But I didn't see it that way. I was thinking that, it's actually an interesting play. It is able to do things, it's able to run strategies that are difficult to run yourself. He can
Right.
borrow money very cheaply. He doesn't get margin called in the same way that you will because he has a business that has an interest, has revenue. It's 500 million a year revenue or something. He can pay a lot of interest with that. He can issue convertible bonds. He can sell at the market. You can do some of these things yourself, but not nearly as well. If you look at yourself as a little slice of MicroStrategy and you try to repeat his strategies, he has advantages, right?
Yep.
And so that's basically what you're buying. And so people have got all kinds of valuation theses about companies. What's the multiple? What's the debt ratio? What's a reasonable multiple? Because the other thing is MicroStrategy's market cap's about 30 billion, and it's got about 15 billion worth of Bitcoin. So it's trading at 2 times its Bitcoin content if you were to liquidate it and sell the Bitcoin, right, and clear the debt. Now, I think it's got about 3 billion of debt, but arguably the strategy business, the enterprise value of that is also about 3 billion. So if you net that out, it's trading about 2 times its Bitcoin content. And Kerrisdale, which is a short hedge fund, piped up somewhere along here to say, they thought the multiple was too high. They published their valuation model and they shorted it. They shorted MicroStrategy. It dropped for a bit, but it's bounced back a bit since then.
Right.
So that was and it's hard to say what is a fair multiple for it to hold because the way I say it is that premium is there because shares are priced based on future expectation, and the question in front of us is how much Bitcoin can MicroStrategy accumulate per share between now and hyper-Bitcoinization, like in the next decade or so, right? I don't know. That's the $64 million question, right?
He's doing the full
Yeah,
spectrum
yeah.
of that.
Well, I mean, he is, and I think one thing that governs it is what multiple it can hold on to, because
the company itself.
Yeah, because one of the strategies they did this in November and December last year is they sold about $600 million of shares at the market, and then they used the proceeds to buy Bitcoin. So it's sort of diluting everybody. There are more shares, but it's using the proceeds to buy Bitcoin. So what I was tracking is the Bitcoin per share. And it's actually slightly anti-dilutive in Bitcoin per share. Like you're selling shares and increasing the number of Bitcoin per share slightly, only 1% or something, right, each time. But if the company had a higher multiple, let's say it was 3 times the Bitcoin it held, then they could sell at the market and really draw ahead quickly, right?
Yeah.
So his scope to do that, and so his scope to do that is sort of, affected by the multiple, and the multiple seems to be related to the Bitcoin price, right? The higher the Bitcoin price is, the higher a multiple it holds. So, in a bear market, it will get down to those kind of numbers, right? The 1.1
So it's always a
Bitcoin
play.
per 100 share.
It's always a play in a bear market then.
Yeah, well, I mean, I bought some at the bottom of the bear market. The other thing to bear in mind, I didn't realize this until later, is that in the early period when MicroStrategy had first bought Bitcoin, they piled on quite a lot of leverage and they were kind of fearless.
Yeah.
And and he just, Michael Saylor, it's
Yeah.
like, he buys some Bitcoin, you think, oh, he's all done. And then he does it again. And we're like, oh man, he never stops. And then he does it again. You're like, whoa.
Yeah.
Right. And so like when he did that, he'd like, taken out different, debt, like bond debt, like 5 or 6 year low
Yep.
interest bonds, early on. And then he also borrowed, I think it was 210 million from Silvergate Bank, right?
Hmm.
And if you go back and look at the, I think at that point it was about 2 times leveraged on the Bitcoin portion of the business. And then I went back and like back tested, well, how bad was that leverage? And actually, he would have been liquidated if that was a margin position on the exchange. There was like
Right.
6 months, I think 5 months straight where they were in a liquidated position, but it
Mm.
didn't matter because these were not,
They're
at
not
the market
liquidation
measured,
events.
right?
Yeah.
They're not marked to market. They're just corporate bonds. They just kept paying the corporate bond interest. And, then he
Without having.
deleveraged a bit. Yeah, he deleveraged a bit by, it was hilarious, Silvergate, of course, sadly got into trouble. And he must have seen that coming because he talked to Silvergate and negotiated to buy back his own debt for like a 23% discount or something. So he
Wow.
actually, bought back because that part of their debt was actually collateralized by Bitcoin. And so
Okay.
you get like stuff in the news that, oh, he's going to get a margin call. And a lot of people don't understand the difference between a margin call and liquidation, right? So it'd be on the Bloomberg that, oh, he's going to get a margin call if the price falls to this and stuff. But
Yeah.
it was nonsense, right? Because so much. Anyway, so it's kind of interesting that they were quite leveraged. And then of course, because they're selling at the market, like as in November and December last year, more recently, that's deleveraging, right? Because the size of the company is growing, the debt's standing still, right? So their leverage now is actually quite low. I mean, I would argue they could usefully take on another billion or two of debt to make it more interesting, right?
Right.
Um, uh, yeah, and so I mean, I guess another reason why you would expect the price of MicroStrategy to go up faster than Bitcoin is there's a bit of leverage inside it, right?
Yep.
But I think it's behaving,
It's leverage
more
that
than that.
it's leverage that has different dynamics than normal Bitcoin leverage. It's much, much
Yeah,
safer leverage.
yes, definitely. I mean, and actually, if you could somehow get unliquidatable leverage, like Bitcoin always goes up in the long term, right? It's a superpower, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's what Roger Ver infamously tried to do on CoinFlex or something, right? He had a margin position, and when he got margin called, he refused to pay it or something, right? So if you have that legitimately, like you have a
Yeah.
leverage position and you've got like very soft margin, you can just wait it out, just keep paying the interest. There's no margin call. I mean, it's fantastic, right? But that's not possible in the real world. So except MicroStrategy's got a structure that enables them to do that. So that really helped build their Bitcoin position early on. That there was quite a bit of leverage in there,
Yeah.
and it was like in a conventional way that was risky. Like it was actually in a like the debt was larger than the Bitcoin value for like
Yeah.
5 months and another 1 month period. Um,
What do
yeah,
you
very
think? Do
interesting.
you think there's room? Do you think there's room for MicroStrategies in other jurisdictions? I know that like the guys did the MetaPlanet deal. I think MetaPlanet's now announced, and there's a couple others. But like, does each jurisdiction need one of these, or is there room for 20 of them on Nasdaq, or how do you think this MicroStrategy is going to
Well, I mean,
expand, and then how do you want to participate in it?
yeah. So I mean, effectively, I'm kind of surprised that more companies haven't adopted a strategy already because
Mm.
Sailor's been running an annual conference to try and provide a blueprint to any public companies or private companies that want to hear you know an explanation of how they did it and what the accounting treatment is, etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can come and listen, and yeah, basically nobody was doing it. So like as you said, now there's MetaPlanet, which is in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I think Japan has some structural differences. Like I think there is no ETF approval in
Nope.
Japan, so that makes a
It's a
MicroStrategy play
shame.
there perhaps more interesting. And I think another difference with MetaPlanet is I think that company was doesn't didn't have a big core business that was throwing off revenue. Effectively, it's a kind
real
of
estate
shell
play.
company that,
I think that
yeah,
they did
that
have a lot
wasn't
of
doing well.
assets though. They had like performing
Yeah, they
assets.
had some capital to buy the initial Bitcoin position. And so, I think that's, well, we'll see how it plays out. And the other interesting thing with it is it's a small cap, right? I think the company's worth about 90 million if you convert the yen into dollars. And it owns about $8 million
Hmm.
worth of Bitcoin.
Right.
So the ratio, like if you look at the multiple of the market cap as a multiple of the Bitcoin it holds, it's quite high.
Hmm.
So that's another question.
Why is it a higher multiple for MetaPlanet than MicroStrategy?
I don't know. Mrs. Watanabe is a big speculator, I guess, right? I mean, in other words, the Japanese capital allocators, and there are a lot of retail. Hence
Hmm.
the Mrs. Watanabe for people that don't know that
Yep. Yep.
expression. It's a TradFi expression. Uh, I guess it's like speculative in a different way, that market perhaps. So I don't know. But I think the very interesting thing is how it evolves, because of that multiple, they can, assuming they obtain regulator approval to do at the market selling,
Hmm.
then they could more effectively use that to buy more Bitcoin and see how the multiple evolves as they do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm. Interesting. And you think there should be one of these on almost every market?
Well, I mean, I think Saylor's view was like all companies should do it because it's a better treasury asset, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of like stock market companies. I mean, of course, there are companies with meaningful Bitcoin positions, but I think they're not a big percentage. Like,
Right.
Tesla has some and Block has some, but their percentages are not like MicroStrategy where it's like 50% of the market cap, right? They're down
I
in
think
small
Tether
percentages.
has a massive amount, right? Tether is
Yeah, as a
I think
private
might be
company,
past.
right. I mean, actually, they do choose to disclose it, right? Even though they're a
Yeah,
private
they do.
company.
They're choosing to
Uh,
disclose everything because of the all the attacks on their transparency before.
right. So let me see. Bitcoin Treasuries .net is the site, isn't it?
Jameson's.
I guess I got the right. What's wrong with this? Bit. Yeah, there we go.
And you guys do this also at Blockstream, right?
Yeah,
You're usually
except
keeping
we're
Bitcoin as your asset.
right. Yeah, so there we go. Like Tether Holdings Limited has 75,000 Bitcoin. Right.
Not too shabby.
$5 billion worth. Yeah. Yeah. So Blockstream in some ways was the uh, original MicroStrategy, if you like, right?
Yeah, because the VC money you basically dumped directly into Bitcoin.
Yeah. So we got like approval in the seed round to put an allocation into Bitcoin, and then so we try to keep Bitcoin on the balance sheet, but we're not Tether, so we don't have a transparency report.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Is there those are kind of cool things that you've done on the trading side. What do you think about this kind of like we talked about the core code and stuff, but what do you think about this kind of like layer one, layer two side chains, all this new language around Bitcoin. Obviously we had Lightning for a while. We had your all your stuff with the federations that you kind of came up with. But now we have a big chunk of companies that are getting VC funding, and we have ordinals and we have BRC20, and like are ordinals and BRC20 and runes good for Bitcoin and
Um,
the future Bitcoin? I mean,
yeah, I
obviously they're
mean, there's
creating
this.
revenue for the miners.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and right. So I think there are a lot more layer two startups. Like the current period has seen, a big growth in the kind of startup map. People will make a map of all the companies working in an area, right? And it's grown. There's a lot of them now. So that's kind of interesting. So I think some kind of innovation funding has cycled back to Bitcoin. So that's cool to see.
Yeah,
Um, and then,
a lot,
then
quite a
the
bit
next,
actually.
yeah, yeah, and that's good, right? I mean, they get, that will do some research and innovation, and some of it will stick, and some of it won't, and people will adopt some things, and other things won't take off, and we'll see, a new set of innovation come out of that. And then, me personally, I think another question is, what use cases are best able to use layer one versus layer two, right? So, there are some, like with Liquid, the assets, like the stable coins, the real world assets or security tokens, um, and the smart contracts and things like that are on a kind of sidechain or a layer two, if you like.
Yep. Yeah. Yep.
And so my point of view is, well, if you've got a Tether stable coin or security, there's now a MicroStrategy token on Liquids, which has got, a share registration agent from
Hmm.
Stocker. It's a Luxembourg securitization vehicle. So you've got these kind of real world assets. And
Yep.
then you've got trustless markets on there. You've got like SideSwap, which is, it supports hardware wallets. You can place a limit order and, walk away. And if the price is matched, it will go from the taker's hardware wallet directly to your hardware wallet, even if you're on a flight or something. So you've got this kind of, upgrade to the exchange structure where there's a central order book with SideSwap, but what they're holding is signed limit orders, not coins, right? So if they get hacked, all that can happen is somebody can buy your offer at the current market price, right? Which is not really very threatening. So
Right.
um, so in my point of view is those assets like real world assets, stable coins, they are fully securable on a sidechain because you can't like steal them and take them off the sidechain because they're defined on the sidechain, right? So I think
Yep.
they
Yep.
provide full security. But of course, the pegged Bitcoin, like the Bitcoin and Lightning, is making a
Yeah.
trade-off compared to the Bitcoin chain, right? So to my point of view, these kind of sidechains which are focused on like trading and smart contracts and things are the ideal place to put those.
Yep.
And of course, there are other protocols that are doing it on the chain, like you mentioned, BRC20. There's
Yep. Ordinals
you
and
know,
rings.
there's also RGB,
Yep.
which
RGB.
is a kind of lightning compatible way to do it, and those are trying to be economical. Well, I think RGB is more economical than BRC. So RGB is trying to make a lightning compatible way to issue define asset issuances on the main chain. But
When you say
my point of view
compatible,
is
you
like
mean using Lightning, or it's like that and Lightning?
it's like a lightning extension that is aware of
Yeah,
those
I know
assets. I think.
Paulo and Tether are big supporters of the RGB stuff.
Right, and I think there's a couple of wallets on there. It's sort of developing. Like it's not very noisy, but they're busy building things, right? So
There's
that's
also like a
cool.
Arch. Arch is doing like layer one integration tools, and it's a startup, I think. And then there's some other stuff that are kind of like layer one Bitcoin platform stuff. And then the layer
Yeah,
two stuff is all bridging, right? So there's like rollups and there's kind of like EVM integration ideas.
yeah. So I mean, I think we'll see what the market thinks, but
Are you
you
deploying? Are
know,
you investing in those companies since you're such a Bitcoiner?
no. So I've stuck to like Lightning and Liquids,
Yep.
because I've got a kind of aura in those, and I personally, I mean, of course, I'm consistent, right? So what I'm doing at Blockstream, with our team is what I think is, the more efficient way to do it. But
Yep.
that doesn't guarantee that the market will agree with me, right? So, but at least that's the one that I think has legs, which is that, well, you don't really need to put assets on a chain because they don't really derive any unique value from being on the main chain that they don't get on the side chain. Like the
Right.
Bitcoins do, the pegged Bitcoins, they're more secure on the main chain,
So
but the
do you
stable
see like
coins don't.
BitLayer and BVM and Bob and Botonics, all these guys as competitors to Blockstream, or are they somehow integrated? partners? Are they just totally different? Like, how do you look at that? How should we look at that?
Um, well, I mean, the way I look at it is that you can't really predict what the market will adopt. So you kind of have to just, you know, build some candidate technology and see what gains adoption
Right.
and adapt as that happens. So from that point of view, I think it's good that there's lots of experimentation, and we'll find out what gets adopted, basically.
Right.
Um, we've taken a bet on doing a lot of things on Lightning, on Liquid, so like two layer twos, and
Yep.
actually the Fedimint protocol also started at Blockstream's research group, so we kind of were involved in three layer twos,
Hmm.
um, and we'll see how it evolves,
Oh, so you're working with
like
Fediment? You're working with Fediment, you said?
uh, well the original protocol was developed in Blockstream, like with Andrew Polstra's team,
Okay.
like some people in there, and
I see.
then there were startups that spun up. The main one, for
Hmm.
example, with Obi,
Yeah.
to commercialize that, right? To build wallets, because what we had worked on was just kind of like library level stuff, and
Yeah,
then
exactly.
they kind of
They made a
say,
company
oh,
out
that's
of
a
it.
cool idea. Let's make a company out of that. Let's get real, like build the wallets, figure out
Yeah.
who's gonna like the because it's sort of like I mean, actually, that's the other thing we hadn't proposed was the idea of community run federations. We were just thinking about it like a
One
federation
federation.
like Liquid. So I
Yeah.
think the way that Obi elaborated that idea was to propose that different communities run different federations, and I think that proved to be a popular
Yeah, it's
concept
interesting.
as well.
It kind of also makes it like spin up and spin down, more flexible, less of a like a monolith, I guess. Kind of
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah.
How about
People like
mining?
permissionless things.
Is
Uh,
mining how important is mining for you guys at Blockstream? Is it a big part of your business?
yes, yeah. So we've been doing kind of institutional hosting.
Okay.
So providing hosting to third parties. So we
Hmm.
don't have that many customers, but they're like bigger customers. And then we do some prop mining for
Right.
ourselves.
What does that
And
mean? What does that mean? Prop mining.
I mean, it means that we're our own client. So we bought some miners and we're mining with the proceed with the coins mined going to us. Whereas the hosting is, pretty much somebody else bought the miners, like Fidelity. We have some Fidelity miners, right? And so you know, those miners belong to Fidelity. They pay us, some kind of
Hmm.
negotiated price for the hosting, which gives us a
Yep.
profit margin. And then we manage the machines. The mine coins go directly to their pool account.
Who decides
Whereas the
on
prop,
the software on those mines? Is that Fidelity or is that you? Like who's managing like what
yeah, that's something
version?
we, you know, the customers will come in with their own choice of pool. Like if they don't know, because like they're not technical or they're just, there's some of them are like a hedge fund or something, right? And they're
Yeah.
like, just do the thing and give us the coins, right? So it's like, well, we recommend you use this pool. Like,
Yeah.
okay, set it up, right? But other people come in and they're like, I want to use this pool. So I'm like, okay, fine, we'll configure that. And we have like a dashboard where they can look at, the power consumption and the hash rate of their fleet.
What pools do you
Um,
guys use?
well, it's all over the map, right? It's whatever the customer wants.
I see.
So one section at hash rate that we operate ourselves is the Blockstream mining node, which is the kind of securitized. It's kind of like an institution, but we made an SPV. People invested in it. We made a security token, and that delivers the hash rate to the token holders, and then they can trade it in the meantime. So that's been
Nice.
running. It's almost 3 years now. It's like 1 month left on the 36-month contract. And
Lord.
so in July, that payout, it should get paid out.
Hmm.
And with that one, we're using Brains Pool
Yep.
actually, which is formerly called Slush Pool. That's the oldest pool. I think they mined the most Bitcoin, and they're like old school Bitcoiners. So we kind of like to support what they're doing.
You guys like the old school people. What about energy? Like, what is out of all your? How many miners do you have and under your umbrella? And what is the breakout of energy that you use?
We don't disclose the capacity, but the energy, actually, we are quite good on kind of like zero emission. I think we're up in the
You're mostly
mid
nuclear, right?
80%.
If I remember
A
correctly.
bit of nuclear, some hydro, some wind, and
Hmm.
some grid, which itself. So we have like a power provider that is hybrid. So we get power, we get negotiate. We've got two power contracts, one from a wind farm and a
Hmm.
failover to the grid, right? And then
Right.
the grid itself has, some, breakdown, right? And so when you add it all up and average it across all sites, like the hydro, the wind, so the nuclear, I think we're about 85% zero emission, actually. And
Okay.
I think the Bitcoin Mining Council, they've been collecting industry stats, and I think
Yep.
they're around about 55% or something. It's been improving year on year. So
That's
we're
pretty
like
big.
pretty high up. Of course, there are like, you know, pure zero emission players too, but we're pretty high
Hydro? Do
on
you have any
the,
hydro?
yeah, we have some hydro.
Where is that? Was that like
It's
the?
in Montreal, like that province is like huge on hydro.
They have a massive amount of megawatts. But didn't you tell me before? I remember a previous conversation a couple of years ago where you said that the that province has they don't like Bitcoin or they wouldn't sell you the power, or do they still? Do
Well,
they
yeah,
still?
it's fluctuated. So when we first went there, they were, running business like the power company is state owned. It's like a Canadian Crown corporation, right?
Yep.
So
Hmm.
um, so I think it was the Quebec province, which Montreal was in, was running like business development to encourage people, come and do your mining in Montreal. We've got lots of, come do your mining in the Quebec province. We've got lots of hydropower. Please come. And so some people came, and then things got political, and they decided they didn't like mining quite as much. Uh,
They just didn't
and
like it.
so,
So instead, they
yeah, I
just let
mean,
it
it's just like
disappear.
politics. Well, I mean, this is the thing. You see, the province has a lot of hydropower, and you know, grids are built to overcapacity because you've got to cover, the peak winter storm where everybody's turning on their power, or like the worst case power rate. And so the
Yep.
average case is like a tremendous amount of unused power. I mean, what does it mean if you have unused power with hydro? Well, you just know your dam is getting full, so you just pour it downstream, right? And
Yeah.
so you're just going to waste it, right? So
Yeah.
you
It's
might as well
stranded.
sell it to somebody if you're going to throw it away anyway. That's
Yep.
our point of view. But and there was a period, because the Bitcoin hash rate has gone up a few notches since a couple of years ago, but there was a period where it's literally the case that the province of Quebec had enough, like, built but underused hydropower to power the entire Bitcoin network, and they
What?
still didn't want to sell it to people. It's like they've got 65 hydro dams in that province. It's got a lot of hydro, right?
That's a
Um,
lot of hydro. That's like
yeah,
northern Sweden. Northern Sweden has 4,700 megawatts on the Vattenfall, like the northern river.
hmm
That's where you have those all those power centers in Boden and on the Arctic Circle.
yeah. So I mean, I think the other factor now is the AI workloads. So now
Hmm.
there's a new customer in town, which is people that
Yeah.
want to run AI training and stuff, right? So and that uses a lot of compute as well. It
Hmm.
has a different like economic footprint. So they build more expensive data centers. Their equipment costs more per megawatt. So got like GPU farms, whereas so the mining machines are
That's
cheaper per megawatt than AI compute, because AI compute is like big GPU rack servers and
yep.
stuff, which is like super expensive and high end, right? And so consequently, I gotta think that the AI people are, of course, they want to save money, but they're less cost sensitive. Like Bitcoin
Yeah.
is a commodity economics; you need the cheapest power, basically. Whereas the AI guys don't necessarily need that, but their capital outlay is going to be higher because they've got to buy AI machines, they've got to do data center grade air filtration, uninterruptible power supplies. With Bitcoin, you don't, you've got to cut costs on that, or you won't make it, right? So it's slightly different game.
Yeah. So now they are selling to you, and they'll sell you as much as you want, or is there some sort of?
Oh no, no, it's still there. So, and I think possibly, I'm not sure if they even like AI at the moment, which is strange.
Welcome to Canada.
It 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 changes because I think they must have overcommitted on some kind of exporting power to the US or something.
What do you
So
mean? That like,
now, well, they're also like different provinces are selling their hydropower down into New York or different areas south of the border, right? And so,
mhm,
if it's the government, right? So if they signed a power contract and they didn't do their modeling correctly, they're like, oh no, we sold too much.
yeah,
Now we have an actual shortage or something, right? Or they worry that they might have a shortage, and
hmm
so then they'll pull back, like they don't want to encourage more data center use, whereas before they were, encouraging Bitcoin and data center. Then probably for a while they're encouraging data center but not Bitcoin. I think right now they're just trying to reduce big load demands because they've sold a lot of it.
But
Um,
is there any Bitcoin mining tools that allow for the like or allow for them, or is it slow enough so that you just need to pick up the phone to do this kind of like power load, adjustable power load? So hey, wouldn't
oh
Bitcoin be the
yeah,
perfect customer? Like, hey, we have a 10,000 machines. If you need more power, just shut our machines down. We'll take a lower
yeah.
rate.
Actually, they have that actually. So they can request in Quebec that you turn off the machines in a period of high demand,
hmm
and if you sort of voluntary, but the power rate goes up,
hmm
and so it will generally be worth turning them off. And you get that in Texas too. I think it's
hmm
actually a clever idea because like
Wait.
economics in real life is counterintuitive, but I think it's the scheme that they have in Texas. You can sign up for different schemes, right?
Yeah.
Where you get paid to give the power back. It's actually good for the grid because if you
Yeah.
didn't get paid to give it back, maybe you wouldn't give it back, and then people's power prices would be even higher, right? Because there'd be
Right.
more total demand on the network. And so you get stuff in the news, and the
hmm
journalists often kind of no coiner Bitcoin
Yeah.
haters, it seems like, and they're complaining that I don't know Riot or one of the public companies got paid tens of millions of dollars to sell back
Not take
power,
power.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and so now they're jealous because they're like, well, they of that money obviously came from the consumer and they put the power price up. They're like, no, 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 that's not how it works. Like they reduced the cost of power by doing that because they gave it
Yeah.
back. So there's less demand in a peak time. There's less usage,
Well, they
and so
don't
the prices went down.
they don't understand that the alternative would be you just always pay a lower price, and that's easy. That's harder to. That means that you don't have the unpredictability of the load. It's built into the system.
Right. I mean, the thing is, you've got to have a bit of sympathy for the people building the power infrastructure. Because they're putting out billions and billions of dollars building out transformers and power generation plants and stuff,
Yeah.
and they've got to get financing to do that. The governments are in the business of talking about wants and needs, right? But in the real world, somebody has to spend the billions of dollars to build that, and they need a business case to get the financing. And so, they have to convince the person financing it or the group
Yeah.
financing it that they're going to break even on it, that they're going to get the money back, they can be able to service the debt, right? And so, if you're like, well, we've got a contract, we'll look at all these mining companies, they're using any unused power, they'll pay this price. It's like,
hmm
okay, great. Like it becomes financeable, right? Whereas otherwise, maybe it's not financeable. And so, contrary to people's expectation, the way to get the power price down is to build more power. And
hmm
also I would say like historically, the sort of wealth of nations is like strongly correlated with power generation capacity, right? Wealthier nations use more power, they have more power generation, and in a positive sense, right? That if a region has abundant power, it will
hmm
there'll tend to be opportunities that come with that where they
Right.
can create prosperity. So I would say unless we're in some kind of doom cult, we should want to build lots of power to plan for the future, right?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
not like get jealous that somebody's getting it, making money, generating power or something. I
I
mean,
think the
yeah,
UK is building a
if you want to,
tremendous number of nuclear, right?
I'm not sure, but like I think that actually, of course, they've been some shakeups in Europe since the Ukraine war started and Russia's supply of gas got political. So I think France ended up faring better than Germany because they had a lot of nuclear power, whereas Germany had started phasing out nuclear power.
Hmm.
And so um, I think that the green policies have started to be more receptive to including nuclear in the, as part of the power generation planning for the future,
Hmm.
which is a good form of power generation. Like it's able to provide a lot of steady base load. The other problem with the sort of intermittent power sources, like wind and solar, is that it places a lot of strain on the grid for sort of you know
You think
if you got to store it, right? So if you can't store it and it's varying, they have you can't just like turn off the grid or something will break, right? So you have to have like inertia and like short-term storage, long-term storage. And so I think they've exceeded the capabilities for handling generation variance. So they've got to like invest billions and billions like in this area, like in Europe and US to build out the short-term storage and grid stabilization to
Yep.
be able to use these intermittent power sources.
Hmm.
Um, or otherwise, you're just going to like blow up some power stations or something. And of course, the people that do the grid planning, they do load studies, they plan for all this stuff, but it's not easy. It's not just a matter of building a lot of solar or a lot of wind. You have to adapt the grid to be able to cope with it. And I
Yeah.
think that kind of stuff is running behind. But Bitcoin miners are actually part of the solution because they are a form of load balancing or load stabilization, which is they can use excess
Yeah.
power and they can very rapidly uh, give it back.
Is
Uh,
that a phone call, or is there actually someone that's built software that the power
oh
consumption?
yeah, it's automated. They'll give you, it depends on the area, but they'll give you like 15-minute data or faster, and then you can like adapt your power use. You'll when it gets high, you'll curtail, they call it, like reduce your power consumption,
Yep.
and that will like reduce your average power cost.
Yeah.
So even with something like, 3% power curtailment, where you're powered down 3% of the time on an annualized basis, you'll make a big saving in percentage terms in your annual average power cost. So it's
Yeah.
quite, it's quite uh, cost-effective strategy.
Right. Right. But the curtail is actually kind of semi-automated then.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there a so let's what is the I mean, what's the future now? Like how would you describe in your own words the next 24 months of Bitcoin?
Um, well, I mean, I think at least in the market terms, there's more institutional things going on, like
Hmm.
the ETFs, and I think it's like fairly early days for institutional buying. Like most of the like ETF buyers are probably like more retail. There are a few examples of managed funds that have started to add Bitcoin allocations to their fund.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think like BlackRock has one, but
Yeah.
that's a very early. And like in terms of the pools of capital under management, there's a lot in the institutional world which hasn't really you know got
Come
delivered in any
across.
volume yet. Yeah, so I think that's in the future.
Hmm.
So maybe that will be a driver for this
Hmm.
economic cycle.
What do you think the peak price of Bitcoin is going to be? Let's do the usual. Every like stage presence and podcast in the nation, you have to always ask what's going to be the peak this cycle in your opinion?
Well, Arthur Hayes has said 1 million. I could get behind that. Um,
This cycle.
yeah.
Well, Arthur's the he's the hype master.
Well, I mean,
You think it's going to
yeah,
go up all the way to 1 million before it pulls back?
yeah, potentially. I would say like between 500,000 and 1 million. Um,
Wow,
and
very
well, I
optimistic.
mean, you tend to get like a blow off top and stuff. So I mean, of course, like price predictions are hard, and I kind of
Impressive.
I made I made one like what was it last August or something when the price was around 25,000, and I said $100,000 before the halving, and we didn't get there, but I was directionally
Understandable.
right in the sense that we got a new all-time high before the halving. And
Yep.
when I made that call, people thought I was nuts, and they thought the next price, 12,000 was more likely than an all-time high before the halving. So like directionally, I was right, but like I didn't reach the number right.
There's so many factors these days, for sure. But that's
Yeah.
impressive. Do you own any ordinals or BRCs or runes or anything like that, or is that just so far off
Nope.
your? Not even
No,
one.
no, no. I
You got to send me one.
mean, yeah. So no, I like Bitcoin perpetuals,
Yeah, you're the
MicroStrategy.
financial product guy.
Yeah, yeah. So I
Do
mean,
you think
actually,
it's
like
like
speaking of that, I mean, I think that the um, like financial innovation on Bitcoin in terms of in TradFi, there are all kinds of interesting structured products like capital protected notes,
yeah,
where you get some upside in like a stock index or some
yeah,
sector, and or you get your money back, or you get 50% of your money back. Like there's some kind of insurance there, right? And so that for something that is volatile but has a history of having quite a bit of upside, I think like things like that could be interesting. So it seems to me like the basics are there. Bitcoin has options and futures,
yeah, definitely.
but it hasn't like in sort of built out and natively used the assets, unique characteristics to deliver interesting financial products. Like there are no Bitcoin mortgages, there are no
Yeah,
Bitcoin
that's.
structured
I
products to
think a lot of
speak
them are
of.
coming. My
Yeah,
my
so it's a
my
good.
opinion is that everything financial will end up on top of Bitcoin at some point,
Yeah,
in some way. Especially if we have covenants in place. If covenants are in place, you'd have layer one debt. I mean, basically like with securitization, with the collateral. I mean, all that stuff could be good. I mean, what I did on the ordinals because it's so complicated. I invested in what is it called? Unbroken Chain, which is like Asher and Domo and Isabel, and then I got involved with them because I saw it as like there is some alpha there, and I'm a little bit more, probably a little bit more pro than you because of the miner revenue and the fact that this, it's good for the business of Bitcoin. I mean, I'm sure that Blockstream is making money from them actually.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think the some of the uh, JPEG guys were like trolling and saying, well, thank you for storing our JPEGs on your full node. And I was,
Yeah, they're
I didn't
making
say it, but like, well, I mean, thanks for all the free revenue from the high
they're
fees, man.
trolling you and you're trolling them back. Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
Domo invented the BRC20. Asher came from like a real, trader that consolidated doing trading, and then Isabel was on the ordinal side, and they just start trading it and like buying all these JPEGs and buying rare sats and stuff. And it's just interesting to see that business evolve. I think
hmm
NFTs proved that there is going to be a permanent market for JPEGs, as we call them. But obviously, it's never going to be as important. In my opinion, it's never going to be as important as, like you said, financial products and the scale of that kind of stuff. But I feel it is alpha though, and I think it is. I like it a little bit more than like the jihadist maxi thought, where she's like, hey, we don't want to touch the blocks, but obviously the blocks filling is good for the miners and hard for the network, right? Am I characterizing that right?
yeah. One thing I said about that, because people were getting emotional, was like, look, you can't stop them, and you shouldn't want to stop them because like you can't. It's a permissionless network,
That's the whole point,
and
right?
if you try to stop them, like if they try to make some kind of heuristic
Well, they
rules
did,
that
right?
frustrate what they're doing. I think yeah, some people like maybe some polls did or some people did,
Big Luke
and
Jr. was
I'm
doing
like,
something
yeah,
like that.
yeah, like you're just going to make it worse because it's like a cat and mouse game, right? They're going to like encode it in a different, less efficient way, and
Yeah.
you won't stop them anyway. And so that was my kind of attitude. And the other thing is like it's what we were talking about earlier in this discussion that you can have a view about what will be efficient or what be what types of applications would best benefit from the characteristics of layer one or layer two, but the market's going to make its own mind up. So now we have kind of, retail payments in liquids and JPEGs on the main chain, where I guess you might have thought that would go the other way around, right? So evidently it's just down to who will pay more, right?
Mm. I mean, that's
Yeah,
the economic freedom of Bitcoin. I mean, so it is
right.
a bit of a, it's a bit of a like a paradoxical discussion or Occam razor, or it's like it's if you are a Bitcoiner, it's hard. It's kind of hard to take a anti position, even though I know there's some purists. Everyone wants it to be very, very efficient network because we want it to be secure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that is the sort of maybe that's how people arrive at that position or that viewpoint, right? Which is there have been a lot of effort over the years into like micro optimizing Bitcoin's efficiency. So I think in terms of because it's a question for rollups, right? So in other protocols, like in other chains, rollups make a difference. And Ruben Sumson, who's an interesting like technical guy,
Mm-hmm.
um, made the observation that Bitcoin transactions are so space efficient that you barely get a 2 times saving from even doing a rollup because like they're so like
Oh
compacted
yeah,
and optimized, and there's no state in the chain. It's like stateless. The context is the transaction. The transaction is like micro optimized. They worked hard to save a byte here and there. So I'm guessing the people that, spent months saving a byte are a little annoyed that people are storing like 100 kilobyte JPEGs in there instead, right? So, but it's a market. So, you make the thing efficient and optimized, and then the market tells you, what people want to do.
yeah, 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 yeah. And I think that it's actually this has been an interesting exercise because you did have people that went against it and tried to like position and make minings that ignore it, and it just showed that the economic the economic libertarian prevalence of Bitcoin just kind of like you know subjugated the problem and just kind of fixed everything.
Yeah. I mean, like, they do say that Bitcoin fixes many things, right? And it's basically what's really fixing things, I think, is the kind of the economic incentive around it, right? So having an honest and like fair market is evidently a somewhat rare thing in the world, right? And Bitcoin is maybe the purest market. So it's cool to see it like a true free market doing its thing.
Yeah. Well, it's a good time. It's a super interesting time for Bitcoin. I mean, I can't. When I got involved, I couldn't have imagined that we'd be this far, this fast. Actually, you have the same
Yeah,
feeling? Like
yeah,
I
yeah,
I anticipated all this would happen. I said it's all inevitable. If I think I was on Peter's podcast a couple of years ago, and I said, Bitcoin is designed to be inevitable, but it moves glacially slow. That's my
right,
Bitcoin like a metaphor. But all the stuff around it, and with the speculative tax from MicroStrategy, with all of your work, the way that the way that things are going, and the adoption in the financial world, and we're now on, it's mentioned in the presidential platform, and it's being used as a national currency. And there's such good work being done with like El Salvador. You know, all this stuff is just mind-blowingly fast compared to what I could have imagined when I picked up the white
right.
paper.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely the case. When we were starting Blockstream in 2014, we were kind of wondering, how the regulators would even react to Bitcoin, right? And banks didn't want to hear the word Bitcoin if you went into discussion with them. Like the person who's introducing you would say, like, don't say the word Bitcoin, right? And then,
Yep.
you scroll forward a few years, they've all got, blockchain, R&D labs, and scroll
Yep.
forward a few more years, and they're all, scrambling to get a piece of the Bitcoin asset class market. So it all
Yep.
changed. And like now, like you said, you have like I mean, there's a Saylor phenomena that you've got public market companies with Bitcoin on the treasury, and you got countries like mining Bitcoin and with Bitcoin treasury. And I mean, there's also, I think it's in Bhutan or something. I mean,
Yep.
if you'd have told us all that, in 2014, people would have said, you're crazy, Greg. That will never happen, right?
Yeah.
But here we are.
Yeah, it's all just quite fantastical, actually. It
Yeah,
seems, and like you said, I think you said a few minutes ago, you said hyper Bitcoinization in like 10 to 20 years. Um, there's definitely scenarios where it could be faster.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's the sort of economic incentive is playing out on repeat, right? So, the people that adopt it early or build technology around it, buy the asset class, provide it to their, financial services clients, win, they
Yeah,
get the business, right? So, now you've got like Fidelity and BlackRock and
leaders. Yeah.
what is there, Vanguard? They were like, we're not doing it, right? So then there are people like canceling their
Well,
Vanguard accounts and stuff, right? So it's got an incentive always, each stage, whether it's like a country level or a company level,
well,
and that those incentives are like, you know, having the
this,
harder money tends to
yeah.
mean that you win, right? So roll
Well,
that
this is
forward a
where
few years.
I think that there's some blessings that we got from all the altcoins and shitcoins and the blockchain initiatives. Is basically, if I was to analyze what happened in the last kind of 5, 6 years, is that those created a massive smokescreen for Bitcoin to become more stabilized. You
Hmm.
had you had the SEC and the DOJ going after all these other entities, XRP and um, all these other companies they've been attacking because of the security. And we immediately got the Bitcoin. Bitcoin had the initial commodity declaration, which put it in a good spot, and then everyone else was trying to make tools and issue and get lots of investment from unaccredited investors, and that just created a
Right,
huge smokescreen for the Bitcoin ecosystem to get stabilized, and also to experiment with stuff. All the stuff that's coming in Bitcoin Layer 2 and even Bitcoin Layer 1, like the Arch and all those guys, and all your stuff. We got to see a lot of experiments happen in a less risky, more unstable coin environment.
right.
You're just kind
Well, I
of
mean,
taking them out.
right. I mean, I think it's probably true that a number of those altcoin which attracted regulator attention, like
Yep.
effectively were the canary, right? So the canary in the coal mine. So
Yeah.
shielded Bitcoin from some of the
And
risks.
they,
And of course, Bitcoin looks like far more conservative and decentralized. And there's no unauthorized security element because it's like it
no.
was the first, right? There's no company.
And they established all the JPEGs and all the decent, DeFi lending pools and stuff like that. The stuff that maybe we would have conceptualized in the Bitcoin community as fast, and because they were just put tremendous amount of capital and tons of successes, but even more failures,
Yeah.
which was it was like a Silicon Valley innovation wave, but we got it in hyper version of that. Very interesting.
Yeah, some people have dubbed that the Scambrian explosion.
This Cambrionic explosion. That was
Yeah,
indeed. And maybe we're going through the membrionic explosion now,
yeah.
with meme coins being the massive, but now there's meme coins on Bitcoin. So like, I don't know where
Well, I
you,
mean, yeah. Well, I mean, there's also like meme stocks, right? Like the GameStop phenomena. That thing is
yeah,
just crazy.
it's unbelievable. And just like the massive amount of momentum behind that is just showing how how the plebes and how the average investor has gotten so much power.
Yeah. Well, I joined the people were talking about it in one of the channels we're in, so I like
Mm-hmm.
went onto a live stream to see what the what's that guy, something Kitty, right? Roaring Kitty was talking about, and
Yeah.
man, he looked it looked like he was drunk to me. I couldn't like it's incoherent. But maybe
Right.
I'd only checked in for a few minutes and checked out again.
Did you buy into
But yeah,
GameStop? Are you in the GameStop?
no, no,
Come on,
no.
man.
Well, I mean, I kind of learned my lesson like back in the '90s that you wanna buy something you believe in, and like the people that short in GameStop, you know, they're right. It had, it was defunct, right? Um,
Yeah.
but you can still get short squeezed when you're right. So that's what the GameStop guys, the Twitter mob, sorry, the Reddit mob are doing, is they are thinking it's fun to organize a Reddit mob and short squeeze some hedge funds. And I don't know
Yeah.
if the regulators know quite what to make of it, really.
Yeah. Well, I think that they don't know, and I think that they've obviously started targeting actually Roaring Kitty and actually the trading side, the trading technology side. Whereas it's just readily apparent in this last kind of 2 years that the SEC is there to protect. They're supposed to be there to protect the average investor, but the U.S. is kind of upside down, where the government is protecting the large investor. It's
Right.
20 years where, with the credit investor rules, where the average investor can't invest in anything that has high risk, high potential, which means that they can't
Yeah.
get rich very easily. You have to be a millionaire before you can invest. And now, even with this
Yeah.
Roaring Kitty thing, they're like attacking them for manipulation, even though it's really, like the institutions have been doing it for ages.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think some people were commenting that they'll go after Roaring Key for you know talking up his holdings, right? Talking up his position. You call that?
Yeah.
But all the hedge fund guys do that, right? They'll be on Bloomberg talking about how something's great, and the traders in the back room are busy selling it while they're saying it's great on Bloomberg, right? Or
Yeah.
vice versa. They'll say something, yeah, it's like overpriced, I think it's going to fall, and they're busy buying it, right? And so, and the regulators don't do anything about that, and everybody knows that's what they're up to, right? It's pretty transparent. So,
Yep.
now this guy does it, and it's like, he's got a Reddit mob. So rather than a dinner conversation in New York, it's on Reddit, and that now suddenly it's wrong, So,
Yeah.
I don't
Suddenly
know.
it's and it's transparent, which is the opposite of what it's always been.
Yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
we
But I
don't
mean,
we don't go
I do
ahead.
have some sympathy for the short sellers though, because
Yeah. Yeah.
like on a fundamentals like value basis, they're dead right. But shorting things is quite dangerous. I was listening to this podcast by, is it Mark Cahodes?
Yep.
As a famous short seller, and it's like a stressful business being a short seller. And
Yeah.
in fact, his firm got kind of financially ruined by, even though they were right, by getting margin pulled uh, by their broker at just the wrong time, right? When they were starting to win big, their broker forced them to close all their positions. Yeah,
It's the original Bitcoin, perps is
yeah,
the leverage whatever. But
yeah.
man, it's been great having you here. I don't want to take. I mean, we've been speaking for quite a while now. I think 2 hours 20 minutes. It's been
Yeah.
just an amazing conversation, and super grateful you're here. Is there any last things you want to mention or say, or we're going to index it so
No,
people will be able to see all the the different
cool. Yeah.
conversations.
No, I think we hit a lot of interesting topics, different over different eras of Bitcoin. Yeah, it's very.
Yeah.
I mean, it's. I was saying the other day that it's, you know, for a trader. I mean, like Bitcoin is interesting for all kinds of people, right? It's interesting for technologists. It's interesting in like sort of separating governments from money, the
Hmm.
state from money,
Yep.
and empowering an individual. Well, for a trader, it's like also a super interesting environment, right? Because you've got volatility, you've got fundamentals, and you've got a lot of confusion. Like the mainstream media often
Yes.
gets it wrong. So if you understand how it works, they'll push the price down and they're like, got it 100% wrong. And you just trade
Yeah.
against them and the fundamentals will pull through, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of fun for a trader to be a trader in this space too.
You have Elizabeth Warren, her anti-crypto army, fighting the system constantly.
Yeah.
But that's great. That's great. So thanks a lot for being here. I'm hoping let's do it again. I hope sometime maybe end of the year or next year we do it again. But
Yeah, for
we
sure.
will let's have a thank you to Adam back, and it's good to see you. I think I'll see you in Nashville, or will you come back? Will you come out to Nashville or no?
Maybe we'll have to see if I make it out to that one. Yeah.
Yeah, if you do, we'll get some Creole food and barbecue or something.
Yeah.
All right, I'll
All
see you in
right.
London
Been
and
good.
sometime soon. Cheers.
All right. Thanks. Bye.